Alrighty, so hopefully this doesn't become a regular thing, but I have come to realize that I should start giving myself more time to stew in between sessions before I do a campaign diary, because now I have a lot of things I want to talk to you about that could have been covered in the last campaign diary for this campaign, but was not. So we're having to do a 2.5 thing because I have too much to share right now, and I don't want to tack it onto the session 3 campaign diary. So first order of business, Trimb was a mostly improv character that I have his brother already created, his brother being Darren Reens, and I had Trudy already created, and they are part of an organization known as the Dawn Scales, and I had all that already created, but Trimb, I wasn't originally going to put a damsel in distress in that dungeon, and that was just something that I decided, you know what, why not, and it just spur of the moment, and I added him in. In doing so, I improv the name Trimb, which was hot on my mind because previously I had name dropped the character Stremb, which is ridiculously similar to Tremb, so that was a mistake. So one of the players said that, oh man, that they thought that the guy's name was just Tim, so I've decided that now that character's name is now just Tim, but T-E-M instead of T-I-M, because I like it better that way. So, Tim is now Tim, and Stremb, Goldhead, I think is what I call him. I have ridiculous names for my dwarf clan. So that's something that I've been doing on purpose, because I think it's funny if we have it so that when they translate, they do not translate well. Oh, I've got it in my notes here somewhere. There we go, yeah, Stremb Goldhead. He probably won't be important. Probably. I mean, I did seed him for a reason, but at this point in time, the party's too low level. Unless they want to die. But anywho, so that was the first order of business, is that Trimb is now Tim, and that while he was an improv character, I do plan on making him a bit more plot important. But the big player there for the Dawn Scales is his older brother Darren. Darren, what's their name? Reens. There we go. Darren Reens. So, the Dawn Scales are one of the big plots that I thought would be fun to put into the background, that depending on how the players interact with them could end up being good guys, could end up being bad guys. They are just a thing that could blossom into a resemblance of a campaign plot. Because the original thing was to make it a sandbox and see what the players explored, and what ended up happening. And along the way, I have created a lot of different things and seeded a lot of different things that I'm gonna just spoil like a lot now, because this, and I think that's fine. It's fine if you listen to these spoilers, because well, so long as you're not a player. If you're a player, fuck off. but so long as you're not a player, it's fine if you listen to these spoilers, because they could go a lot of different directions. A lot of them might not even happen or end up mattering. But since we're already on the topic of them, the Dawn Scales, the ruby that Trudy retrieved, it has a chunk of dragon flesh in it. It is the contingency plan of Irkiri, who is a blue dragon biomancer, and he is the one that created the dragon folk. So when the leader was like, hey, we are losing, we need to do something, he's like, well, what if I give us ground troops? And he used that as his kind of in to get funding for his lab and to do research and whatnot, and then he went and created the dragon folk. And on the tail end of the war, Irkiri decided that we're losing, but I don't have to die. I don't have to stop doing my research. I can preserve myself. And so he created this ruby that houses a chunk of his flesh inside of it. Under the instructions that he can be revived via the reincarnation spell of a suitably powerful druid. And so the Dawn Scales, particularly Darren, has received visions and is the prophet of the Dragon God. And the Dragon God, according to Darren, has been expunged from history, that the humans and the dwarves have covered it up. And so he wants to proliferate teachings of the Dragon God and verify its existence. And so when he stumbled upon this plot that would allow him to bring back one of the dragons from the war, effectively, if he can get this dragon to go public and say, yeah, no, the Dragon God existed, it's been covered up, then that effectively adds a lot of credence and evidence to his plan. Because currently, they burned any books or anything that they haven't been able to find any evidence of the Dragon God thus far. Now, whether or not evidence actually exists out there or not is yet to be seen, but Erkiri is Darren's play to get evidence out there. And so once Erkiri comes about, if he does come about, because there are things that players can do to stop this, Darren doesn't get demoted to a mook. Darren will still be his own big player. They both have different goals, and I think it'll be interesting to see how they play together and how the party plays with them. On top of that, I wanted to tie them to some other plots that I had been toying with. There is a campaign I was a part of while in college that was terrible and awful, and I hated it. And in that campaign, I played a paladin, and he retired from the party because they're objectively evil, terrible murder hobos. In character, he withdrew from the party for moral reasons. And then for other reasons, that being the party saying, hey, Derek, bring back your paladin, we like him better. He could heal and tank and whatnot. I ended up bringing the paladin back. But from the paladin's perception, he must have been guided there by his god. And so then when the party was consistently abusive to this paladin and constantly just asshats. And there was a time, the very last session I played with them, that effectively it boiled down to them paralyzing this paladin and then taking turns verbally shitting on him and telling him how terrible he is for hours on end. And I had decided then and there at the end of that session that they had succeeded in breaking this paladin, that in this moment of weakness, in this moment of madness, he tried to make sense of the world. And when he tried to make sense of the world, he could only come to one conclusion, that they were right, that he must have been guided back to them for a reason. It couldn't have just been fate that brought him back together with these terrible, terrible people. No, it must have been his god showing him something. And that thing he's showing him is that effectively their murder hobo tendencies of killing people that don't need to be killed for no good reason, that is something that his god wants him to do. But why? He's taken an oath of life. He serves the god of life. So he twists it a little bit, and he thinks perhaps the lesson here is that life is not deserved, that perhaps life needs to be tested and earned. And if there's no trial, if someone is not ever put into a deadly position and survives, that they are not worthy of their life, and that they need to experience such a trial, and that he himself will become that trial. And so then my game plan was to have him try and outmurder the murder hobos by trying to kill literally everyone he came across as a kind of FU to the other players, and be like, yeah, you know what, you want to be murder hobos and be assholes, I can be an asshole too. Which it didn't end up coming to that, because the campaign died before the next session happened, which is fine by me in all honesty. But it still left me with a character that I'm like, I can use this someday. This is an interesting story. This is an interesting ideology. I can turn this character into a villain, and I've been wanting to put him into the stage setting for a long time. And I recently found a place to put him because I was looking for a couple answers to some questions I had. One of the questions was, who does Sam, the cult guy who summoned Snaggletooth, who does Sam need power for revenge against? Because I knew that Sam needed power for revenge against something, or to stop something, and he was desperate enough to turn to these devils to get that power. And then the other question I had was, there exists an artifact of recent creation that the players may ignore or may unleash onto the world, and I'll get into that in just a second, but I want to involve that in the story and make it more likely that it gets unleashed into the world, because I think it'll be more fun that way. Or at the very least have a way that I can influence the party besides just with the ego weapon itself. And my answer to that was with, what if I bring that Paladin plot in right now? What if there's multiple conspiracies and plots in the background, and so long as I loosely tie them together, and so long as they're all contingent on the party and their reactions and how they choose to stop or not stop, or defeat or even assist these different conspiracies that they end up discovering, can either turn into a campaign plot in their own right or interact with each other. And I don't know. I'm doing a bad job of explaining it, but effectively I'm creating this web of intersecting what if scenarios, and we'll see how the party reacts to them and what ends up happening. But this paladin, whose name is Steadfast, his original name wasn't Steadfast. That's a new name for this setting. But this paladin named Steadfast being added into the equation answers that question. Is that Steadfast and his fairly small at this point in time organization of zealots, this sect of the Church of Life that is twisted and deserves, and thinks that life deserves to be tested and isn't innately deserved, has gone around and attacked a few towns and hamlets. One of those belonged to Sam, and Sam initially went to the Church of Life and to the local authorities and whatnot, and they could do nothing about it because he's technically a part of the Church of Life, and they would need permission from their god in order to go and kill him by their teachings. And so the Church of Life is kind of tied. They have this rogue agent they can't really do anything about. And so Sam's like, well, I've got to go do something. So getting power from this devil, and his hope was to make this devil more powerful, which would then in turn make him more powerful, so that he and the devil could go and stop Steadfast, which didn't end up happening because the party just interrupted that, which is fine because that was a bad plan anyways, and it involved torturing people. So it was a morally questionable plan at best. But it allows me to bring in, or at least start seeding Steadfast as this big threat that needs to be stopped to the party, because I assume that they're going to question Sam. Hopefully they do. If not, he dies. It's whatever. These things happen. And then the quest, one of the quests ignored that said cleric wanted, the quest giver is Yorence, and he is the apprentice of Colbrin Big Magic, a dwarf, as you can tell from the silly last name. And Colbrin was into some shady shit. I'm not sure exactly how much of this I should spoil. Give me just a second to think about this. Okay, so Colbrin has a secret basement and underneath his magical shop that he's set up in Stout Shadow that his apprentice just recently found out about. And in this secret basement, he was doing some bad experiments, and those bad experiments created a very powerful ego weapon that calls itself the Patron of Unlife. And the Patron of Unlife has no means currently to escape from that basement that it knows of. So right now, this ego weapon and its host are trapped down there. But the party may be able to influence that. They may allow it to escape. They might take the magic item out of there. There are a lot of different ways that going through that dungeon could play out. But the end thing is the Patron of Unlife, I thought was a very interesting villain. And I thought that it was a shame to just have it be a side quest that they could just gloss over and not care about. So I'm trying to work it such that it has the potential to be bigger than it currently is. And so that's why adding Steadfast was a good answer for how to make the Patron of Unlife more likely to become plot important. And that Steadfast has a scryer, a prophet of sorts, a soothsayer, or whatever term you'd like to use for divination wizard. I don't know. Point is, this scryer has seen this weapon, knows of its existence, and says that, hey, this will effectively allow you to create the armies you want. You should send people to Stout Shadow to go and obtain this item. So this gives me a reason, beyond just Sam, to also start introducing at least the agents of Steadfast, if not Steadfast himself, into the Stout Shadow ecosystem, and that they are here to look for that weapon. And then the weapon itself, what it does is it does grant the person attuned to it some spell casting, but its big gimmick is that alright, I need to go into explaining how some things work in my setting. So, magic items and artificers and the way they create those magic items has to do with soul magic, which, unlike problems of the souls like lichdom and whatnot, isn't innately considered evil in my setting. Like if you're raising the undead, if you are a lich, yeah, that's objectively evil, and people are gonna go after you for that because it involves a lot of ritual sacrifice, and liches don't have a very good track record of having a good alignment. But artificers, particularly, there we go. Dwarves have a long history of honoring warriors who don't die on the battlefield, but who reach that old age, that have what are considered powerful souls, with imbuing them into weapons and armor and whatnot. And sometimes an aspect of that warrior remains, and it gives it intelligence, and it creates an ego weapon. And in this particular case, Colburn was doing an experiment involving substituting soul matter with energy from the negative energy plane. And he succeeded, technically, but failed, in that it didn't take the personality of the soul, it took the personality of the plane, which the negative energy plane, in my opinion, if you were to personify it, it wants everything to be undead, to reach a state of unlife, that life is wrong and unlife is right. And so its big effect is anything it kills comes back as an undead that is of equal measure to what died. So like if a commoner died, or just some random people that weren't really important died, they just have like zombie stats, right? But if like a player character were to die at this point in time with them being level 3, I'd probably bring them back as like a white or something like that. So right now, with this weapon being locked in the basement, it is not a threat. But if it got to the surface, it'd be a threat, because then the bodies will start stacking up, and suddenly you've got an undead horde. So Steadfast very much wants this weapon, because this gives him a way to make an army that he can then send at towns, and eventually, once enough of those people die and get added to this army, he could send even to a city, so that he can test people and make sure that only those who survive that have been proven themselves worthy of life may truly live. So it puts this ego weapon that I'd previously created for this quest and makes it more likely to actually do something. But then it also ends up being a nice little tool that this villain that I've created once. So that's how I'm able to tie those two together. There's also a lich in that basement. She could become of importance. I won't go over the details for her now. She's certainly something that the players, I think, actually would use her to their advantage for quite some time. Eventually, she may become a threat, but that's certainly like a late campaign thing where she actually starts to become a threat. For the most part, she will be nothing but a boon to the players should they accept her terms. And she is in a position to do nothing but barter right now, so she very much needs them to accept her terms. But yeah, that's so we got the Patron of Unlife, we've got Steadfast and his Trials of Life, we've got a crippled Lich in the basement, we've got the Dawn Scales and them resurrecting Erkiri, which then segments off to two things, what Darren wants and what Erkiri wants. And then we've also got Gareth Girthwide, Viscount Gareth Girthwide, I believe is his title. The current ruler of Stout Shadow, and his bullshit he has to deal with. There are noble families that are not okay with a dwarf holding a human title, and so he certainly has political enemies that he has not involved his nephew Thord with thus far. That might quickly change. And these families, I don't have them named yet, and I don't have them completely fleshed out. That's the next big thing on my to-do list. But I want to also connect them to the Dawn Scales and to Steadfast, such that they're not just enemies. They're the enemies of my family, and so thus they are just evil villains that need to be smote. No, they are not entirely evil, and they are also not entirely wrong. Why? Because Gareth is funding the Dawn Scales. Why? Because he wants a new dragon war, and he thinks they're going to bring it about. Why? Well, because he believes that in order for there to remain lasting peace between humans and dwarves, they need a common enemy, and this peace isn't going to last. So he needs to create a new common enemy, so that peace may continue to last, at least between those races. Yes, there's still a war, but what war is worse? A war between humans and dwarves? Or a war where humans and dwarves go and battle a common enemy that doesn't have a leg in? So that's kind of like all the big spiderwebby plots that I'm going to try and weave together. I've already got another way to weave the Dawn Scales and Steadfast together. They were both raised by the Church of Life and grew up together. So Tim and Darren and Steadfast were all childhood friends. And we'll see if that comes into play. I have a few other ideas that are bumping around. I'm not gonna say yet, but I could use to tie them together. And ultimately, we'll see where the players go, because so much of this is dependent on who they talk to, when they talk to, if they talk to, certain key NPCs, what quests they take on, what quests they ignore, what threats they ignore, what threats they join, because the Dawn Scales can make a case that, hey, this is just them trying to effectively bring back a forgotten god. That doesn't sound like something that is innately evil, and is something that the party could get on board with. Of course, they don't know the whole thing about what's in the ruby and resurrecting Erkiri and how that could have ramifications, but the Dawn Scales wouldn't be sharing that with them anyways, so we'll just have to wait and see what decisions they make there. And then, of course, there's all the decisions to go to the basement, to ignore the basement, what happens to the Patron of Unlife, and then whether or not the Patron of Unlife is taken to the Dwarven capital and destroyed before Steadfast can get his hands on it. And then, if Steadfast doesn't get his hands on it, how much of a threat can I still make him? Because I think I can still make him a threat. So we'll just have to see. That's what I'm saying, is at this point in time, This started out as me being worried that that Crimson Anvil was going to be a very boring sandboxy campaign, and it still is sandboxy, and that it's still very much up to the player's decisions, but it's no longer remotely a boring campaign to me. I am very much interested in this. I've got a one could say too many irons in the oven, in the stove, something like that. I don't remember the saying, but so I certainly am going to have to do some juggling, and I need to make sure my notes are nice and neat and tidy. But I think it's something I can handle, and I'm excited to see where this campaign goes. And I wanted to share that excitement, because this wasn't anything I touched on in the previous session, campaign diary. And if I were to touch on this and tack this onto the end of campaign diary for the third session, it wouldn't be tacked on the end. There's too much to talk about. It's been like 25-ish minutes already. And I'm just now getting to the end of it. So, with that, I think I probably should end, because I'm just rambling at this point in time. So I'll see you guys on Sunday. We'll see how they finish their trek back to town, what happens with Smoothick, their goblin in the backpack, what happens with the Dawn Scales, and what they do for their next quest, and whether or not that next quest involves the Patron of Unlife, and whatever other things I concede. I have a feeling it's going to be a very interesting session that's going to set a lot of things in motion, and I'm very excited for it. So I'll see you Sunday. Bye.